Okay, so hello and welcome to this unnamed podcast / video. I don't know what we're going to be calling it, but there should be a name out for it soon. I am one of your hosts. My name is Ivan, and I am joined today by...
I'm Bevan. How are you?
All right, there we go. Now, just a bit of a background between our, Bevan and I's relationship. We've known each other for a very long time. I think we met at the Drupal Sydney meetups a long time ago.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
Either there or Drupal South, one of the, or both.
Oh, yeah, who knows? So we've spent many times and many hours at pubs just talking about Drupal and the world in general. And we decided to, and I think, Bevan, you actually brought up a few times, it's like, why don't we just record what we are talking about at the pub? Mind you, we really couldn't because of too much swearing and things like that. But that then got us thinking and talking about potentially getting together and just talking about Drupal, but also anything else tech related. So today, what we're going to talk about, this being our first video / podcast, whatever we end up calling this, and that is 10 things that I'm passionate, 10 Drupal things I am passionate about. And so here we have a list of 10 items, which Bevan graciously put together and got ChatGPT to summarize it, because that's how you do things. And so what we're going to do is simply go through each item and give our input about each point. So let me go first. I'll go first and talk about point 1, which is clear communication. So focusing on writing clear, concise issues and comments. Now, one thing I do like about Drupal is, I think I learned this pretty early on, and that is just the issue queue, where everything needs to have an issue. And I was actually a Drupal user before I was a full-time developer. So I actually learned how to manage tickets and all that from reading the Drupal issue queue and following along and just learning the ropes about, making sure everything is tracked and having like a epic ticket or whatever they call it, like meta tickets, I think, back in, in the Drupal world. So yeah, I really do like that first point, because as I said, like, I was first a Drupal user, then I became a professional developer, and I learned a lot of skills about just, writing concise issues.
Great points. Yeah, when we get talking specifically about the issue queues, that's, and I'll put this list together. And writing about clear communications on issues, I know there's a few years ago, working on the feeds module, I actually went through and went through all the comments and went and updated the description at the top, just because it had moved so far, and knowing what the state of that ticket was and exactly where it was at was just very hard to get your head around. And you go, if you've got new people coming on who want to help in that issue, well, they go, hey, I want to help with this issue that's here. So they then spend half an hour reading it, and then their time to help has been used up just reading it. So it's one of the exercises I did, and I'm very passionate about making that easy to do, especially for the newbies and stuff, because it's one thing for very advanced Drupalists to come to and read all that and be used to doing that and understanding it, but it's a barrier to entry for new people who can contribute. So it's just to Drupal's benefit to write clear, concise communication on issues. Interestingly, in my point on that one, I was nervous as anything, because it's not my issue, right? It was the feeds module. Got somebody else being the contributor and the manager of that. I spoke to one of my other Drupal friends in Drupal and said, hey, I'm going to rewrite this issue. And they said, go for it. I was just like scared of being reprimanded and get upset. And surprisingly, got a thank you back instead, right? It was a great thanks for rewriting that issue. And that thing has moved forward really fast. I believe if I go back to it, it was a roadmap even, right? And I sat down and spent maybe 40 minutes rewriting the issue. And that was before working on it, and did some contrib after that as well. But I am very passionate about clear communication. I find when I open an issue and I go to read it and I'm like, I don't know what that, or is this the is this the thing is this the problem I'm experiencing? And you see other people's comments, you go, I don't know what you mean. Like, it's kind of, I find that such a big barrier to getting things done because you're just lost, right? You kind of like, you may perfectly well have the skills to contribute, but you're like, I don't know what this guy just said. I'm busy. So it is a big thing that I'm passionate about, right? Getting that communication clear. And sort of, I wanted to speak to that experience of actually going through and editing a description and having that experience of being told, thank you. I'm still scared to do it. But I think it's important for everybody to be able to, and people communicate different ways, which actually leads on to our next.
But before we get to point 2, one thing that I just thought about now is that when I was looking at CMSs before I chose Drupal, now this is going back to the early noughties. One thing that I did like about the Drupal community in general is that it actually did have a issue tracker for each project, which I think was very uncommon back then, where there was a place to actually collaborate and create these tickets. And I do believe that so if you go to the project page now on Drupal.org, it is running, I think Drupal.org is running on Drupal 7. If I'm not
something like that, I believe, yeah.
Yeah, and it's using the project module, I think, which is its own product built for Drupal. And there is talk about moving it over to GitLab, but just having a central repository or a central place to build things and comment is, I think, what gave Drupal an advantage early on. Now everything's kind of replaced by GitHub, and I do kind of like the fact that GitHub is the standard, because hey, if you have a bit of code, chuck it on GitHub, create a few issues, create a few pull requests. Yes, you're going to get spammed by a lot of people asking questions, but just having that place,
I tend to agree with those points as well. I like the move to GitLab because merge requests and stuff are easy. But even so, now that it's in this hybrid space, you kind of read an issue queue and then there's comments and there's people reviewing patches. And then you've got a bunch of merge request updates and you're like, what does that apply? It's still, and I think that fits into the clear communication. You go, I don't know what state this thing's in. I want to review it, but I'm not even sure what I'm reviewing. Can happen. And that's, I think there is a space for people that are used to working with it and heavily involved in the community. They're used to that. They were there when it was birthed. They saw the progression of how that came about and therefore understand why things are listed the way they are. But I feel there's got to be a barrier to new people because I've got 13, 14 years Drupal experience, and I still look at it and go, the cognitive overload of just trying to. It'd be a wonderful world if you could go to an issue, read the description, and go, I know exactly what state this is in. I know what needs to be reviewed. I know, like, right there in the description, and not having to read 10 years worth of conversation that sometimes goes on tangents and comes back and stuff, right?
Yeah. But now what I do is I often look for the first patch. The most recent patch. Sorry. Yeah. So often in a ticket, I look at the most recent patch and just check it. And somebody always says, all right, worked with 10.1, 10.2. I know recently when I had to do a Drupal 9 to Drupal 10 upgrade, and I had to patch a whole bunch of stuff just to get it up to that next version.
You had to re-roll the patches.
Had to re-roll the patch, chuck it in Composer, but it's always grab the latest one, grab it, and then just chuck it in. So and there are issues with like hundreds of comments, but I think the community has done a good job in just coming up with a standard of triaging it. I know that there's a big push of triaging tickets because that's a huge part. And I know that from building websites for like the last 15 years. Building website, the actual development part's a simple part. It is the communication. It is managing the tickets. It is the project management. That's the tough part. And eventually you're going to be able to write user requirements, give it to like ChatGPT, and it's going to build you something half decent. That's going to be the future.
There's so many points to speak to here, and I think some of these will get covered later, even in this list.
Yeah, well, let's probably jump on to point 2. So you take over point 2.
All right. So point 2, an inclusive approach. Now, our little thing here is embracing diverse communication styles, working methods, values, and goals beyond just race, religion, gender, and disabilities. Because that's a big kudos to Drupal. There is a big passion for inclusiveness and diversity, and there's lots of working groups to improve these, and a real strong culture for that. But it does tend to focus on that politically correct. We want to include minority groups and people with certain disabilities and stuff. But then you come into working styles and communication styles and stuff, and I think that it can lack a bit. And maybe I do this because I think maybe I'm a bit different to other people, and I think differently. And that talks to that point we just had, is that when you read an issue and someone asks a question, someone else responds, and I'm just like, I have no idea what you're talking about, right? It's kind of, I can look at it and go, I don't understand how the person who answered that question possibly just answered that question because the statement was ambiguous. It's like, kind of, how did you know? And I find that a challenge. So that's when I talk about inclusive approach, it's almost like recognizing that we're all different. Right? And it's not just, and it is beyond, it's great that we do things like include other minorities and do things to bring people from different classes and stuff together, but also the understanding that people speak differently and don't have the same knowledge base. And this is like being inclusive for beginners. I do have a strong passion for, where it comes up later, for helping the new people out. But that's, I think it's important to consider that when you're working on an issue, because often there's people that really know what they're talking about commenting on issues, and there is an aspect of, hey, remember that new people might want to come and help. So try and consider that when you're updating your issue queues. I'm probably a culprit for it too. I think there is a case of often when you're writing it, especially when you got a patch and you got the solution, you go, look how smart I am, I fixed it. But then I also find myself spending lots and lots of time editing my comment. Like, I'll review it and I'll edit it and I'll put it into bullet points and post it up. And the next person throws some vague, ambiguous thing straight after it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not just a Drupal thing. That's a thing that happens in the world, right? You find that. And it happens all over the place. But it's when I had this list of 10 things I'm passionate about, it definitely hit the top of the list. That passionate about. Consider your communication when you, if I'm passionate about communication in itself. I'm a big believer in, if I say something and my listener does not understand what I said, that's on me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So that's where that comes through in that. And that's, and I think I probably like this stuff a lot because I'm probably neurodiverse, and people say things, I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Absolutely. For me, I actually, because I've been part of the Drupal community for a very long time, I've seen it kind of evolve a lot. One of my things early on when I started writing online, so I've been writing my tutorials for a very long time, but one of the things that I learned about like diverse writing is that don't assume gender in your articles. So a user is referred to as they, like simple things like that. And that actually, when I read that, it's like, all right, yeah, that makes perfect sense. The user, so the user needs to click on here if they have this permission and this and that. Whereas English doesn't have a, non-gender specific pronoun and things like that. So little things like that I've learned from the Drupal community. Also going to Drupal camps and Drupal cons, I've noticed when I go to the code sprints, they often have people who specialize in accessibility. I think I've even had people with vision impairment as well help out with the development of Drupal, and also with like Drupal South and also Drupal cons as well. Now, for people who don't know, maybe our audience will be outside of Australia and New Zealand or the Southern Hemisphere. Drupal South, what is Drupal South? Drupal South is a like a Drupal conference that jumps between the Australasia area. So it's been in Australia, New Zealand. I think I think there's been a push to have it in Fiji, which I would absolutely love.
I have voted for that.
I voted for that as well. I remember talking to somebody about it at one Drupal Sydney meetup about it. So you know what? I will go to Fiji. Yeah, that would be awesome. So yeah, when we refer to Drupal South, that's what we're talking about. So it's just like a Drupal camp that jumps between Australia, New Zealand, and any other Australasia area that's going to host it in the future. But also, I know that for minorities, they do offer scholarships as well, which is huge, because I know personally, going to Drupal cons is very expensive.
Yeah.
Going to Drupal South as well can be very expensive. Maybe this is a point for another another podcast, but I've only ever been, well, luckily been paid to go to a Drupal South once in my life. I've paid every single DrupalCon I've gone to, I've mixed it in with a European holiday just because it's so expensive. So yeah.
That's why I've never gone anywhere outside Drupal South for that reason, right? And often I've had my employer pay for the ticket and pay for the, and it's part of, it's one of those things. Having it in Fiji would be great because you get to go to Fiji, but there is a legitimate argument for it's an inclusive thing because there are Drupalers in Fiji, right, and how are they going to get to Wellington or Sydney or right, and it's expensive.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas if you went and put it in Fiji, it puts the expense of the people with them, tend to be the more affluent people are the ones that have to pay to get there.
Or, for me, flying to Wellington, because I'm not at a major hub, I have to take an extra flight between there, or I need to catch a train down. So that really, adds into the cost. I do wish the Drupal cons and camps were a little, well, Drupal South as well. If you do pay the full price, it gets pretty pricey, but there's ways to get the ticket for free.
Pretty damn good too. We put a plug in for them while we're here, I guess, because Drupal South is one of my favorite things.
Yes. Well, hopefully this goes out. Hopefully this goes out. But yeah, there is a Drupal South Sydney, which is great for me because I just need to. I just need to get a free ticket.
That's one of my favorite things about Drupal is the Drupal South conference. So I'm sure we'll get to that in one of these lists later.
All right. Well, do we have anything else to add for point 2?
Or I was thinking in the communication things a little bit, because you're speaking about that inclusive language of using the user, and they and I find in the communication styles, I often try and be very explicit. I've got some, I don't like words like the and it often, right? Because often I'm reading it and it goes, so, then you go to the page and you click on the button and then it opens it and you're like cut kind of stuff, right? It's kind of, I like to be very explicit and use the nouns of things. Go to the page, click on the button that is labeled with submit, and that will take you to the page, which is the node edit page, and click on the title of that node called blah, blah. Right? I can get very explicit. And it's an interesting topic though, because I think some people can find that quite overwhelming with information too. But I know from I'm often reading things and I'm like, you've lost me. I don't know what you're talking like, and that's what I mean by I don't know what you're talking about. Now you were talking about this. The classic one is like the server, when I've been trying to set things up and it goes, and then do this on the server, and you're like, but which bit's the server? Like they're both servers, and if you'd named it, I wouldn't have had that confusion. So there's that sort of, so I'm very care about that length, because it's especially when you're at work, you're trying to get things done. I don't want to spend an hour sitting there trying to figure out what the server means, when you could have it's got a name, use it, right? Kind of one of my things. If something's got a name, use it. And you get into it. I've got all sorts of rules about how to communicate. Like, don't make up words. Like, don't invent words. That's a big one. So, yeah.
All right.
We can move on.
Okay, well, let's jump to point 3 so I can introduce this one, and that is local community engagement, valuing local community interactions such as Drupal South, which we've already talked about, and water cooler chats for building friendships. Now, this is the one that for me is pretty huge. So I was at, I think, the first Drupal Drupal Sydney meetup, one of the first ones in
Wow.
2007, 2008-ish. And it was run by a person that was running the meetups back then. And I actually enjoyed going to the meetups in Sydney. And I remember when we were, peaking at like 40 people at a time, and we'd all go to the pub and stay at the pub till like midnight, 1:00. And that's where I actually, made a lot of friendships, like yourself, Bevan, with you, with a lot of people in the community. And it also helped with networking as well for work. Like it was huge for that. And that's where I also learned a lot, where I remember the first time learning about the virtual DOM, something a bit more recent from a former Drupal, where he was talking about the virtual DOM and understanding that stuff. It's like, what's that? Oh no, that's where you use, what is it, Ember.js and all this type of stuff. And for me, that was very important. But I'll also chuck in that if you can, you get more value, I believe, when you help out and volunteer. So for me, just a bit of a quick history. I used to live in Sydney, no longer live in Sydney, live outside of Sydney. And one thing I do kind of miss is that when I was in Sydney, I actually helped organize the Drupal meetups in Sydney. So that was trying to find speakers, presenting, ordering pizza, ordering Domino's, making sure, calculating it. Okay, so we have 20 RSV, 20 people have RSVP'd. We always go for half a pizza each per person. A third's not going to come. So let's imagine 15 people are going to come. So, doing the pizza calculation. But that's one thing that I really liked, and that was actually helping out, because it kind of forces you to get out and actually go to meetups. Whereas here, where I'm living now, there are meetups, some great meetups, but I'm not really part of the organizing committee. So I kind of lose that, kind of lose that friendship of, and also that accountability of actually getting out, because so many times, like, I don't like to label myself, this whole like introvert, extrovert. I think people are too quick to label themselves, and then forever are like, I am this, I can't change. With me, and this is what I've been told. It's like, I've been told by my wife that, oh yeah, you're an introvert, but depending on the context that you're in, you're very different. So I know that when I'm in, Drupal presentation mode, I'm totally different. So for me, the community, the actual local community aspect for me is huge. It's helped my career, essentially. There's no doubt about it.
It is absolutely a good forum for that inclusion we spoke about before, because it is that chance for people, because it's so much more intimate, right? When you've got a room of 20 people, it's easier for people to meet and make connections and ask questions. Of course, it's in that small space, and you're having a beer afterwards. There's so much more opportunity to make connections than when you're there looking at an issue queue, right? And often and the same thing, same goes for Drupal South, that you often, the number of times I've met people, and then you go, what's your name on Slack and they give it, and you go, oh, that's who you are, right? It's kind of, and putting the names to faces.
Yeah.
But you made a few really good points on that, because I've put it here, like it's top 3 on my list of things I'm passionate about Drupal is the local community engagement and the meetups. But then when you talk about accountability, I know there have been long periods where I haven't attended at all, especially since COVID. I don't think I've gone at all. But, there was a time there where I can be, I'm very social. And for a while, all the meetups were on Thursday nights, and that was the night all my friends met at the pub. So it's like, and there's there might be a girl you like going to the pub every Thursday. You go, that wins, like that.
Yeah.
But that's where the accountability had come into it, for sure.
Absolutely.
I know I can sit here as you're talking. I'm imagining all sorts of people I've met through local meetups and gone to, same thing with the networking that I've got through that process. But you get the sense also that, Drupal is the community, especially when it's local, it suddenly seems a lot smaller, right? Because imagine something when you go on a forum like, you know, a Linux forum like Manjaro forums. There's just like, it's a whole world of people, and Drupal looks the same. I remember the first time you go into the Drupal thing and you go, here's this huge, big piece of software. I want to contribute to it. Who am I? I'm a little mouse in a sea of sharks, right? And other people who are smarter than me, they know more about it than me. They've been doing it for years. And then you go along to a local meetup and you meet people and you make friends with them. And next thing you know, you're part of that community. You know, and that's you start to see comments on issues, and you go, I know that person, right? Like literally know them. I've met them in person, and you know, and that makes a huge difference, because it's not suddenly you against this big ocean of random smart people, right?
Well, also, I think it allows you to humanize people, and this is one thing I've noticed about this whole remote working. Again, well, we're going on another tangent, but I will quickly turn this back because I don't want to go on another tangent. Maybe this is another episode. But I personally like working from home because I don't have to travel. But it's hard to humanize people if you've never actually met them, because they are just a little chatbot in chat. Well, they're not a chatbot. That's disrespectful to them. But they are just this little avatar in Teams or whatever Slack you are using. So by actually meeting the person and talking to them is very powerful. The other thing I will add, and then this is just a rant time now, is that if you do organize meetups for anything, it doesn't have to be Drupal, just any type of tech meetup, please offer non-alcoholic options that isn't Coke or a heavy sugary drink. That's all I ask for.
Yeah.
Get a nice Perrier. What is that? Italian mineral water, just something like that. Because as a person that hasn't drank,
you and I both go anti-sugar on this one.
Well, the thing is though, I don't want to, like, I try and avoid sugar. I'm not going to go anti-sugar, but I just try and avoid sugary drinks. Even kombucha, I'm a big fan of kombucha, but somebody who, well, it's kind of funny. It's like there's certain people in the Drupal community that know me when I used to drink, and then there's people that don't, that know me as a non-drinker. But one thing I've noticed even at the meetups here where I'm living at, you like look at the drink option, water or Coke, and it's like I don't really want Coke at 9 o'clock at night, you know. Anyway, but that's just a bit of a rant. But I mean, what else can I add? I mean, with like Drupal South. Now, I learned, like, with like conferences in general, I personally don't get that much value out of the sessions. Even though I think to myself, oh yeah, I'm going to watch it on YouTube after the fact. I don't. But it's still important. Please, people, go and present. It's very important to present. But I get the value from the water cooler chats, the chats in between. 100%. So I often end up chatting to just a whole bunch of people in the hallway. I think I did it with you, Bevan, like so many times where we're like, oh, when's the next session? Oh, it's already finished. Okay, coffee cart comes out.
100%.
Yeah, coffee cart comes out and you line up for the morning tea or afternoon tea. So
but the value is immense, right? Yeah. I mean, I love the irony that you couldn't do that if you didn't have to talk to them.
Yeah.
Right. But I have been known to go to a Drupal South and maybe a 10-1 talk in the entire weekend, but come out and go, that's the best. Right. That's because of the people you meet, the things you talk, and you still learn stuff because you're there with other Drupal people talking about Drupal things that you usually don't get to talk about at work. Yeah. Not because it's controversial or anything. You just don't have, you're not in that same space where you can just and that real sense of that connecting and finding other people with the same challenges and same, because it's easy to get into the space of Drupal of just expecting things just are great and they work all the time, but then you'll be around the water cooler at Drupal South and I hate that too. Every time I open that, it doesn't work. And you go, oh, right. It's not, and it makes you get off the island of your own isolated loneliness, and helps with things like just understanding that other people like some of the things you see is not just you. Is a big part of that. Now, of course, you'll find other people who go, no, I didn't have that problem at all, right? So, but you get that experience, right? And you're never going to get that just by reading issue queues, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because people don't tend to get vulnerable on issue queues, right?
No.
Hey, right. So that's
yeah.
But that's but speaking to them, recording them, I think that's a wonderful thing they do. I definitely do go back and watch the recordings on YouTube.
It's important, I think. Yeah,
I absolutely do.
It comes down to the. Oh, sorry, I'll just jump in quickly. It just comes down to the inclusiveness as well. So people who can't afford it can still watch them, and I think that's very important.
Well, on that point, I've in working environments shared them. You come back and you go, this talk was absolutely amazing, and that's I find you got to get out of the Drupal island. The slight little tangent here, but I know nearly every project I've worked on these days it breaks up into you've got your Drupal developers and a DevOps team.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of that time, DevOps have never heard of Drupal until they started on the project, and they don't know what it is. And I have said before, I think maybe we need such a concept as Drupal ops, because Drupal's got its own idea about how it wants to be hosted and managed, right? Configuring the settings.php. I've worked with DevOps people who have configured it all outside, and you go, no, you should have there's a setting for that in settings.php, right? And I'm not on the DevOps team. I'm not there to see them do it. I'm not there to tell them that. I'm not a DevOps guy. And there's a talk on it at Drupal Slack. And it's great. You can grab the link to the YouTube and go, hey, DevOps team, here's that thing. Often way too late, but it's a good way to get that out, because the non-Drupal people who are working with Drupal don't go to Drupal South, right? And they don't sit there and watch Drupal videos.
That's it.
So,
well, let me just chuck in one more and then we can jump on to the next point. The final thing I will add is if you are new to a community, put your hand up to actually volunteer at some type of event. Now, what I did is, as a Drupal person, okay, most people will be surprised to know that I do use WordPress. And I remember there was a WordCamp, Sydney, 2018, I would say, 2018. And I just put my hand up to volunteer. And I met so many people just by volunteering. I got a free ticket, which is great. The fact that it was Sydney meant travel was easy. And I was at the registration desk. I talked to people. I even helped facilitate the Q&As at the end of sessions, at the end of presentations, and I even asked questions as well. And that, I think, really helps you get out of your comfort zone. And I know for me personally, I would rather go back to the hotel and, do something on my own, whereas I have to kind of force myself sometimes to go out. So by just doing this, it doesn't feel like I'm forcing myself that I have to be, networky or in anything like that, because I'm actually volunteering and helping out. So that's what I would also recommend. If you are new to the community, chuck yourself in there and put your hand up and say, look, I'll volunteer. There's many tasks that people need help with.
Yeah. It goes back to that inclusion a little bit too, because that's there are lots of ways to contribute without necessarily doing code, and people say that all the time, but inherently the people that write code tend to do most of the contribution. But that's very easy.
That's another episode, man. That's another episode right there. Absolutely. I'll be more than happy to rant on about that.
Yes. Yeah. But that is that's why it's a great point that you brought up, to be able to just volunteer at a meetup to order pizza. It's such a simple thing to do, right? And really connect and get involved in the community that way. Because it's the same thing going in, and even the point I made before about going to an issue queue and then rewriting it so that it's easy to follow. That's got to be hard for a newbie, because even some of them I can't do it, because it's like, I don't understand what this says. How am I supposed to rewrite it into a form that's easy to read? I don't like. I'm then the big thing. What if I'm wrong and I get it wrong? But so that's a very good spot for someone to be able to connect that way. I like that. That's a good point. And I have seen that. I know when I've gone to Drupal South, I've seen people working on the welcome desk, right? And they get to meet every single face that walks in the door.
Yes. All right. Let's jump on. I think you want to take point 4. Bevan, introduce us to that.
Sure. When we've got support for new developers. It's funny these things come up in conversation before we get there. I've already mentioned this in that case. But advocating for juniors and those feeling challenged by Drupal, highlighting the reality of regular challenges faced by in the community. This is a big one for me. In fact, I'll go back to the Drupal South. We'll bring up Drupal South again, because Drupal South in Hobart in 2019, was it, or 2018?
Oh, that was just before the world went.
It was 2019.
It was 2019, because I knew when I flew back, it was smoky. That was when the bushfires were on.
Yeah.
2019.
So I ran a panel there called Drupal Confessions.
That's right.
This was actually really what that was for. I mean, I jokingly laugh. It was also a way to get work to get a talk submitted and have work pay for that talk, and then not have to do much. Right?
I know, that's pretty easy. Just being a moderator.
Yeah.
That's smart, actually.
I love telling that joke, because it's like, hey, I've got a lot, but because it was an amazing session, as it turns out. Right? I did not do it because it was all I did. I did do it because it was easy, but I also did it because it spoke to this point very, very much so. And it was my attempt to get people that were sort of very well known for their strong contributions and being very good Drupalers, so to speak, to talk to these points and then really bring up those the daily challenges we have. And it was such a fantastic session, as it turned out, in that sense, because there is, and it may not be something that's from the community itself, but I know I experience a bit. It's easy to lose sight of what do you call it? That comparison game. You know, you can feel like you're on your own. And I know I get challenges with Drupal every day. There are challenges that I find on Drupal on a daily basis. Setting up your development environment. And I spoke to you about this the other day. You come in and you turn it on in the morning and your database isn't working, and you got to spend an hour debugging Lando and databases, and it's, and you right, and that stress of things taking a long time, and sort of that's something I know I experience. I'm not the only one that experiences that, and I do find the community it's easy, the same thing, because it's the people that are very, very well skilled at Drupal and handle that really get noticed and get seen. And I think there's a lot of quiet achievers out there. In that, and that's not even speaking to myself. I know working on teams, we talk about the introvert extrovert thing. I know I've worked with people on teams, and I've barely ever heard them speak a word, and they just sit there and do their Drupal work. And having that chance to encourage them and speak to those people, and it's the same reason I talk about the clear communication and making it easy. I just think it's very important. It's even when I'm writing my code, and sometimes I overdo it a little bit, but trying to write the code, because remembering this needs to be read by somebody else, not just somebody smart. This is not an opportunity to show how smart I am. It's an opportunity to write code for, I think the juniors should be able to come pick it up and be able to read what it says. And that's the thing, is Drupal comes with its challenges. A lot of things about Drupal are hard, and they're hard on a daily basis. And they're not hard because you're not smart. They're hard because they're hard.
Well, exactly. Yes.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, and I think there can be a little bit of a culture of not wanting, because there is a lot of be positive, like don't be negative. And it's like, but then we just brush the problems under the rug. And then so you got newbies coming in facing these problems and no one's talking about them. So the newbies are like, oh, it must be me. Right. So I think there's value I really believe there's value in looking at both sides of the coin a little bit and go, because like when Composer came out, for example, when Composer first came out, it was slow, right? And you start.
I still have problems with Composer, man.
See, like good,
like the latest upgrade. So I did a Drupal 9.5 to 10.1 upgrade.
For the newbies, Composer being your dependency management page.
Being a dependency management. I was in dependency conflict hell. I remember the days when we had Drush make and things worked tonight. No, I don't want to say worked nicely, but I do understand. And this is what people, anyway, well, before we jump onto Composer, let me give you my thoughts on support for new developers. So there's a few things. First of all, I feel like conferences generally do not have tracks, and this is something that I've noticed even with certain camps and conferences even here, is that often there are no tracks for just beginner Drupal stuff. Now, I've never organized a conference, so I'm not sure. I don't know what the intricate details are about organizing a conference. I'm sure there's a reason for it. Maybe people don't want it. Maybe the Drupal community has actually changed now and doesn't want basic, presentations about using views, using search API, using fields or web form, the stables. Exactly.
Yeah.
All that stuff. And so that's one thing I've noticed, that everything's all about how to host Drupal. A lot of it is how to host Drupal, or it's some agency pushing out their distro, because it seems that now every agency everywhere has their own distro of Drupal. About
here's how I integrated layout builder with paragraphs to make a
absolutely. So
yeah.
I think for beginners that's important. The other thing that I've touched on, I think I've talked to you about it, is that with everything being moved with in Drupal 8 and above, so I don't know what you want to call it, Drupal next generation or whatever, Drupal 8, 9, 10. So anything greater than 8, 9, 10. So everything is now a service. Okay. And one thing I've noticed is that as a developer, and I'm not a smart developer, like I will tell you right now, I would gladly ask the stupid questions. I learned PHP by using Drupal. Okay. Yep. That's how I learned PHP. That's how I learned to code. I first learned Drupal. Then I was like, let me play around with PHP. So I am not a computer engineer. I did not study computer engineering at computer science at university. I do have a diploma in network engineering.
Science?
Exactly. But I do have a diploma in network engineering from TAFE. For people who don't know, that is like a college-ish thing in Australia. Anyway, so I learned to code by using Drupal. And the way I discovered APIs was going to Drupal.org and typing in node _ and then seeing all the functions that appear. Now, once I learned that, there is a standard to function names, node _ save, node _ insert, node _ load, node _ update, node _ something. When I had to do something, I was like, let me just search for node _ or comment _ or I don't know, whatever you want to, whichever module you want to call it. Now I feel like half the effort is figuring out, which service do I use? Is it Path Negotiator for loading up your
services I've got? Yeah, like even
exactly.
That, right?
And that can be, I don't know which ones they are. And so many times it's like you ask a question, use this service. So again, when it comes to this stuff, this is where I think Drupal developers, or especially new Drupal developers, struggle. But you also have to think about experienced developers, but people that are still new to Drupal and doing it the Drupal way. I've actually dealt with that, because I do remember that back when Drupal 8 was, talked about, before it was released, there was this whole thing about getting off the Drupal island, and how by moving over to Symfony components, we're going to get an influx of Symfony developers. I don't think that's happened personally. If people can prove me wrong, I'll be more than happy to be proved wrong. But I don't think,
no idea myself,
since then, Laravel's taken over.
and Laravel's everywhere.
Laravel's everywhere, absolutely. So I don't think it's happened. So you may have issues where it's important for, say, experienced developers, but that are new to Drupal, understand how to do things, because there are certain standards that you want to stick to. Views, content types, layout builder, and things like that.
It's an interesting point. There are Drupal ways of doing things that aren't Drupal way. Like, there's no official way of doing things, but there are ways that everybody in the know knows.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
For example, you go and read how to install Drupal, right? You got to know to search for how to install Drupal with Composer to know to use Composer to do it, right? Otherwise, and I may be wrong about that. The documentation might have been updated, but I still think There's still instructions on clone it with Git. And there are new users who don't even think to search for that because that's in their package manager on their machine, right? They think, oh, I've got Drupal, right? And then there's a lot of that in the, knowing to go get a development environment like Lando, or that it might be better to use Docker than run it locally on a Mant stack is just, if there's no official way, but I don't know any developers that do it any other way, right? All of them are either using DDev or Lando or Docker generally, but
I don't. I use, well, the thing is that, coming back to that, because funny you should say that, I actually had somebody put in a comment on one of my videos. So I had this 1.5-hour video on using Radix and Bootstrap 5 and things like that. And I just jumped into it, assuming, because most of my videos are, okay, here is my freshly installed Drupal site. And I jump in and go build things. One of his first, don't know if it was a he, one of their first comments was, it would be good if I spent some time explaining what type of setup I have. And it's kind of like, I could, but again, there's so many ways of hosting a Drupal site locally. And coming back to the whole thing about using Lando, DDev, Docker, I spin up a Drupal site once or twice a week. And I do not have the space on my MacBook Pro because they're expensive. Because every single time you spin up even a DDev or Lando site, it's going to use up a gig just sitting there because of the images. Has to pull down the latest images and things like that. And so I like MAMP Pro because it's faster. And back in the day when I was stuck on an old crappy Intel MacBook Pro, it was hard to stream and run Docker at the same time. And so I like it. But for like work related stuff, it's always Docker. And then it uses 100 gig of my space.
The fan thing, it's a very interesting point to bring though when you're talking about new people, because it does depend, and there really can't be there isn't, that's kind of my point. There isn't an official way for Drupal to do it. And and someone's got to go and write the documentation, et cetera, et cetera. But it's just I don't have a solution for it, is what I'm kind of getting at. I'm aware of the problem. Like a newbie's going to come in and they don't know what question to ask, right? I remember a case in point, Varnish, right? I've been working in web development for years, and I started working at a new company, and then they start talking about Varnish and put Varnish in front, and I'm like, what's Varnish? Right. And it had been around maybe for a couple of years, but if I hadn't have been working with somebody that could tell me about Varnish, I'd never would have even thought to search for it. Right. If I gone and set up my own website, I wouldn't have thought of, I knew what reverse proxies were, but I didn't really, because that's what I think, having been around so long, like I was building websites in 1995, right? Where you wrote HTML, straight static HTML and CGI bins and stuff. And, and now there's reverse proxies and all this other technology, and these things can easily come along. And if you don't know to look for them, you don't know, like that's an interesting, and I don't know what the solution for that is, but it's an interesting, I really care about those new people. There's, that's kind of why I think sending the culture for every time you communicate, have a bit of an ear out for the new guys. Because it's easy to forget. One thing I've experienced, it's easy to forget that once upon a time you didn't know and what it was like when you didn't know. Like once you learn something, it's easy to feel like you always knew it, and also easy to fall into that everybody knows it. But once upon a time, it's hard to put yourself in the shoes of somebody that doesn't know it.
Absolutely. All right, I think let's jump off onto point 5, and I will introduce this one halfway. I know. Let's hope we don't go overtime. So that is fixing small bugs, prioritizing the resolution of minor yet persistent issues that can add up over time. So this one I kind of understand. You do have the big upgrades of Drupal, but then a lot of the times it's just little fixes here and there that are fixed. And I feel like, and this is a conversation that I have with a lot of people, when I get comments on my videos about Drupal, 9 times out of 10, they're always about people complaining about Drupal.
Yeah.
And it's always these little things. And I always take a stand back and think to myself, well, I know that smarter people in the Drupal community have built this functionality. And there's always, like, I know when I've worked on websites, there's always these little things that, okay, it's a tiny thing. It's not going to get fixed. It's not going to get fixed. And there's always workarounds around it. And I think once you understand those workarounds, and that's just part of the learning process, and that's the thing I like to always convey in comments when I reply to these people that are pretty negative, because sometimes, most of the time, I just ignore them, because it's like, it's just not worth the effort, because they're just going to come back and we're going to go back and forth, and we're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, but then you get good engagement on your videos. So.
But that's the thing. But one thing I've decided to start using is just ChatGPT to reply to them. That way I don't even have to think about it. And I thought, you know what? It's got to pump up the engagement. Why not? And I don't have to write it. I know that's what I'm going to start doing. Hopefully there's a Chrome extension. Yeah, hopefully there's a Chrome extension they can press and it just replies for you. But yeah, but that's my take. What's your take on that?
Where else are going with that? That's because I tend to find it a lot. I think often I'll open up an issue and you go, "What's this annoying thing?" You open up and it's a bug that's like 10 years old, and you're like, "Has that seriously been there for 10 years?" And trying to come up with examples. I've got one that's fresh in my head. I'm terrible at remembering examples for these things, but since I wrote this list, I hit that. And the funny thing, it's moved on. People have put fixes on it, but it was an issue that opened in 2015. There is a caching bug in Drupal. Now, at the moment, I'm developing a Drupal course for beginners. There's literally a section on this is what users and roles are, and here's how you create a node. And it uses the Umami demo to go and create a node and then log out and log back in as editor and go and edit that node. And as soon as you do that, you log in as an author, and then you log out, you log back in as an editor. The content view looks the same as when you're an editor with the same links, and they link the 403s and stuff, because there's a caching bug in views, and you're like, I can kind of see why people don't because logging out as one role and logging in as another one's not something you regularly do. But when you're a brand newbie, that's exactly what you do, because you're trying to work out how it works, and you open up the demo site and you go, I want to publish something, so I'll go in and I'll log in as an author, I'll create it. I can't publish it, I want to publish it, log out, log in as an editor. What's going on? Right. And I don't know what the cache is. I don't know there is a cache. I'm a brand new user of Drupal, and it's like, this is broken. Right. And you see that, and these things can be hard to fix, and lots of kudos to the people who worked on it and fixed it, and it is moving forward. But it got reported in 2015. It is on there as major. I kind of want to argue, though, it's critical, because that's broken. Right. That's from a brand new user's perspective, that is a deal breaker. Right, it does not work. Right, it's it's not really a security leak if you go and clear the cache between logging in, or even use Drush if you know how to. And it kind of comes back to the newbie thing again as well, right? And I find there is a bit of a culture of, there's a workaround, so it's fine, and then so it never gets fixed. It's not fixed yet. It's reviewed and tested by the community, and lots of people have, and it has been discussed since 2015. But it got reported in 2015, which would have been Drupal 7 then. Yeah. And now we're Drupal 10. It's the same bug still there, which shows different SIP. And it's kind of and that's just one example, and there's lots and lots and lots of them, right, with these little issues. And it's sort of, I just think I feel, for me, they're very important. They're very, very important, because if I'm a company and I'm trying to decide what CMS I want to use, and I go, hey, I'm going to grab Drupal's Doom. That's the first thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to see that bug and go, it's broken, next. And there's, right? So I am passionate about fixing, especially when they add up. Like it's the old phrase, the little things that kill. Big piles of little problems is one big problem, right? But if you take each one in isolation, you go, it's not that big a deal. But when you add them all up, it's And there's only so many people, and we're all volunteers. I don't mean to criticize anybody, but it's sort of, I want to spruik the prioritizing of these things. Like that's kind of, because that's the kind of friction that, it frustrates me. It's because it cost me ages because I thought it was broken, and it's like, what's going on? I didn't know it was a bug. Thought, what have I done? Reinstall your site. You go, and how did I get in this situation? So then I got to test and figure out, how do I replicate this issue? Then, we'll get to this, but I happen to speak in Slack. Someone pointed me at the issue, but the way it was worded, I never would have found the issue. Right? Spent ages fixing it, especially if I got a manager on my back going, and they've seen it. They're going, well, we can't release that. That's right. So then I got to explain that it's a 15-year-old bug. If I can find the issue, right? It's kind of, it seems like a small thing, but there are scenarios where it's absolutely hell. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. A recent one that I actually stumbled across, again, I thought things were broken, was Layout Builder. And if you add the breadcrumb block to Layout Builder, you get a 500 error in Ajax, and you get a little message saying there was an error processing your page or something like that. Everything saves. You can still move things around. You can still move blocks around, but just when you add in this breadcrumb block, it kind of spits the dummy and says, nah, forget it. But everything else works, and it still technically works. And I thought, oh crap, is it one of, is it the site? No, I found out that it's a bug. But again, it's one of these things that chances are, and this comes back down to, say, going to the community and talking to people. When you actually talk to people that are working on these things, you find out just how complex a lot of these things are.
It is the other side of that coin.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's the same as just me as a developer. Whenever I look at an existing project, I'm thinking to myself, why did they do it this way? But then I'm like, you know what? There's probably a reason for it. Like, yeah, I don't see it now, but so many times I've been halfway through a project and I'm just thinking about the project having dinner, and I'm like, oh, that's why they did it that way. And it just finally clicked. So, yeah. Oh, now I know why they can't implement it. And coming back to the caching problem, I'm sure that the caching system, again, this is probably another episode, and we perhaps
it is.
It is because caching is huge. I work on caching problems like weekly, still work on them. And most of the time it's a wrong cache tag or a cache context getting added in. Anyway, but yeah, there's probably a reason for it. And 9 times out of 10, do a drush CR or for our old school people, that is drush CC all. And you're fine,
Yeah. And
so yeah, sorry, I've got nothing else. I've got nothing else for point 5. You want to introduce point 6?
Point 6. Streamlining workflow. Oh God, these things join together, don't they? Streamlining workflow, continuously adapting the changes that affect daily workflows. Oh, I know what this means, and especially with transition to new systems like Drupal 8 and Composer. We spoke to that earlier.
Yes.
That's see, this is where I say I'm passionate about this. And I know other people in the community have sort of put work into this as well, trying to find a system where it's really easy just to spin up a Drupal core where you can write patches and contribute, and then spin up another site and just have it all working, and streamlining that workflow. And I've made the mistake of going through and spending a couple of months working on streamlining that workflow, and then somebody makes an upstream change and your whole workflow doesn't work anymore, and you've just lost 2 months of work because it's just not applicable. And that's, I put Composer in because it's the very obvious example of when Drupal 8 came out. I'd spent years getting my workflow working to be able to just go in and clone the upstream Drupal, make a patch to core, just go create patch right there in my project. There's my patch file, upload it. And then we got Composer, and Composer doesn't install the dev core by default. And even if it does, right, it moves things around anyway. It doesn't just bring the package down. You can't just make a patch like that. You need a whole new workflow. And these things change, and that's where I'm getting at when I speak about passionate about that. I speak about passionately getting a workflow that works, right? But that's it's part of the IT industry. I guess things change, and that's I'm really passionate about getting that because I'd love a world where I could come into work in the morning and you boot up your environment boots up and you go, there you go.
Yeah.
Right. But a lot of our job as developers is preparing to work. No.
And that is very true. Or switching context, switching projects.
Yeah, well, that's
yeah.
That can be hard because I've had times where I worked on multiple projects and then they're all different, which is a problem. And then other times where you work on one project for a year and then you switch to another one and that's all different and you can't, right? And it's like, and then you've worked out all these, you've got all your daily motions, you've got your little scripts that make things easy, and then you switch projects and none of those scripts, none of that applies anymore. Right, because it's a different structure, or somebody else has set it up, and also some of that, and it can be really annoying because on the last project you just spent ages streamlining and solving all these problems, and you go on to the next project, and it's got all those problems you solved, but they're implemented in a different way. So all your fixes, it's the same amount of work again to solve them all over again, and it's just like, and now I'm back to spending an hour and a half a day working around these things that I just solved. Getting rid of, right? It's and perpetually just up against that. I find that super frustrating. And I don't think it's just a Drupal thing. I'm so Drupal centric because I've been doing Drupal specialist for years. But that's and it comes back. It's all these things sort of come back again to that's the the Drupal confession talk was to bring up this sort of stuff. Yeah, we all have these problems. Let's talk about them. It's not a case of let's necessarily fix them, but at least don't brush them under the rug and pretend that it's not all there. It's kind of I like to talk about these things because especially when you put it in the case of the newbie when they're coming in. You got someone who's like in their early 20s. They're not very confident. They're in a new job. They're doing and they come in and they got to spend an hour and a half working around these things and trying to solve these problems just to get their dev environment up and running, right? And having their bosses doing timesheets and stuff. And you go, how do you work? And they go, what'd you do all day? And you go, I got my dev environment up and running, right? It was, and if you're not aware of the case that, hey, look, everybody's dealing with that. That's part of the job. Then that can be extremely stressful. And I think just, because I know I've had the feedback, you go like, we're all in that boat. What are you complaining about? It's like, I'm not complaining. I'm sharing the information. Like that's.
Well,
like it is. Complaining is more like asking that demanding somebody fix it. And that's not what I'm doing. I just want, I'm just, can we just acknowledge that the problem exists? That's it.
That's it.
And that's especially for that case, because, so it's better for everybody, I think, if we just acknowledge, that is the case. We're all dealing with that, right? And I think it's a conversation worth having. That it's possibly because dealing with things like Lando and Docker environments and stuff. That's not at all going to be a Drupal issue.
Yeah.
But
well,
that's why I come to Drupal's cache, because you throw Drupal's cache in the mix.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you're saying, a developer in their early 20s. I'd love to see a new person using Drupal that's in their early 20s. Drupal's, they're going to be writing, I don't know, whatever. No, I just wanted to just chuck that in as a joke. Maybe I know. It's like, who's learning PHP? Well, everything's now coming back to server-side rendering anyway, so maybe PHP will have another renaissance. Well, you kind of think that. I feel like
PHP's got a bad rep for not being popular, but it still keeps making the top 5 list all the time.
But you think about it, it is still huge.
Yeah.
This is massive. Yeah. Anyway, well, let me chuck in my 2 cents worth on this. So daily workflows. Using Composer now is much easier to when Drupal 8 came out, because there's actual documentation. There's enough artifacts on all these forum sites on how to use it. Also, thank goodness Composer 2 came out, so you didn't have to wait 20 minutes for the dependency checking to happen. So that's great. And once you understand it, it is better. For me personally, I do like that I can look at a composer.json file, look at the patches, hopefully it hasn't been manually patched. Well, first of all, you make sure that the modules haven't been committed. If the modules haven't been committed, then it hasn't been patched. And I do think that, yeah, there would be a good push towards like Gitpod, something that we've talked about using it potentially in one of these videos. But I do believe that there is some work or something happening where people could spin up a PR or a merge request, whatever GitLab calls them, using Gitpod. And I do wait, and I hope that there's
look at Gitpod I had. That's why I think when I first looked at Gitpod, it confused me because I think
Yeah.
I did it that way through a PR.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like that.
But I do. One thing I've pushed at my current contract is, can't we just have the DevOps team build out these environments now? Because I think the team that I work with, they are on Azure, so Microsoft. They have Codespace, like GitHub Codespace. It's 2024. Where's my driverless cars? Oh, we were promised that. I think we're meant to be on Mars as well. But I still hosting a site, running a site locally is a pain. Like, it's still faster for me to virtualize Ubuntu, like run a virtualized version of Linux, run Docker in that on a Mac. Probably it's still faster. I don't know. The latest version of Mac or the latest Docker is pretty good. Well, thanks to Apple Silicon, but it's still like.
Ivan.
Well, the thing is, though, I feel like in the last 15 years, nothing has changed. Things have gotten even more complex, but yeah, we're still building the same thing, which is you're building a website that has a few forms and a list of objects. That's it. That's all what you're doing. When you think about it, that's what a website is. It is that's all what it is. It's a list of objects, be it content, and a few forms. That's all I do. Okay, that's all what we're building.
Lists. Yeah, displaying lists. That's what Views is for. The list generator.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. So I do think that, yeah.
A lot of really amazing things have happened. You spoke to it, like Composer patches, right?
Yeah.
Being passionate about here, you can get a lot of but then also that's a lot of things have improved. Like the patches thing in Composer is amazing. We talked about Drush Make before, and when Composer came out, it was a challenge. But on that, Composer patches is absolutely awesome when you can just stick it. You just open up Composer and go, here's my patch, and it just applies it, right? You don't have to learn Drush Make. Like if you know Composer, you kind of know. Like it's not hard to learn patches on top.
But think about this. This is something that this is something I just thought about now. Just how advanced Drush, the first version of Drush, was. When you compared it to every other system, there was no Composer back then. When Drush Make was out, there was no Composer. I used Drush Make 2007, 8. And
that's what I was using when I started. Yeah.
And that was ahead of its time. Like the fact that you could, from a CLI, control a website. And I do believe that WP CLI, I think, actually acknowledges Drush as one of its where you got a lot of inspiration.
Cool. Yeah. I've never thought about that because I went from being a bespoke web developer to a Drupal web developer, right? That's I was working on a website. It was a real estate listings management thing, right? And wasn't even using Git, right? They had SVN back then, and they weren't using SVN properly. And then I left that job and moved into Drupal, and it was opening a whole new world for me. There's some things to be passionate about Drupal for, because I like to make the joke. People go, "How long does it take to build a website?" You go, "I can build one in an hour."
But I can build one in a year. It depends.
Yeah. If you want to move the logo, it takes like another year. But Drupal you can just literally spin up a brand new website out of the box. And when you're outside like a commercial environment where there's lots of requirements and the need to do things in a very exact way, if you've got all the flexibility where you can go, I don't really care as long as it looks nice and works, then Drupal spins up really goddamn. Like Drupal brings so much out of the box, right?
Absolutely. Okay, well, I've got nothing else to add for point 6. You want to jump on to point 7?
Point 7.
Okay, I can introduce that one in. So that is this one I'm actually excited about to talk about. Contemplating Drupal's future, engaging in discussions about Drupal's relevance and evolution, like its role in headless architecture and broader tech landscape.
Yeah.
All right. Let me jump into this because I've been umming and ahhing about my future with Drupal and also Drupal's future. It's like I am entering in a new stage of life. I'm not going to mention my age, but and one thing I do know is that the tech industry is very ageist. Like, I do believe that most developers, and this is something that I've noticed, is that you don't stay a developer long. The good developers become managers, which is the wrong approach. I would love to just be able to. Yeah, I would love to just be able to play with tech, and that's essentially what I use WebWash for.
I've made that argument so many times. I'm a good developer. I want to be a good developer.
Yeah,
I don't want to be a manager.
people.
I work hard being a good developer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's like you're a great developer. You're fast. You're quick. You're I don't want to say that cringy 10x developer, but you enjoy solving problems, and that's one thing I enjoy. And it's like, and I've been thinking about, yeah. And that's that's one thing I've been thinking about. It's like, what's my future with Drupal? And I've been, thinking, oh, Drupal's dead, Drupal's done, it's just going to be using government and that's it. But then now when I see the way things are going, I do get excited about Drupal again. And also I get excited about Drupal after coming back from like Drupal South. But to answer the question, so yes, I do think Drupal has kind of carved out a niche for more enterprisey. Now, what do I mean by that? Yes, you hear the word enterprise, you're like, yuck, enterprise. It's not like, what is it? What's that? Adobe, what's the Adobe one? That one,
site man, Adobe site something.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, it's always anyway. One thing that I think, so at my current contract, we are using Drupal in a headless setup. Okay. And of course, there's ways. The site's been around for a while, and we've learned a lot with the way we've implemented GraphQL and things like that. But we are always on the lookout for other solutions because we have a full separate front end. So we could essentially, because the front end is Next.js, using Apollo through GraphQL and communicating with the Drupal backend. Of course, it's still going to be a bit of work if we want to chuck out Drupal and use something else, but we can. And we've always been on the lookout. So I've been on the lookout for any type of CMS that can take over Drupal's capabilities. There's not that many out there that can do what Drupal can. Now, if there are, please people leave a comment below wherever this video is. I would love to know, but here are some requirements, because I know people are going to come up and say, oh, if you install this, and this, or if you pay this company. Anyway, it needs to be proper open source. None of this, it's open source, but then to have multiple roles, or if you have more than 3 users, you need to pay. Because being in government, we have unlimited users. Drupal strength, okay, now I'm probably talking more about Drupal strength, is unlimited roles, unlimited permissions, revision support out of the box, internationalization and multilingual support out of the box. Content workflow is huge for us. Being able also, because I'm doing work for government, we need to keep content around. We don't delete content. It needs to be archived. I've looked at Strappy, which is a JavaScript, like a node-based CMS. Awesome. Very Drupal-like. You create your fields and things like that. I've looked at Keystone. Again, similar to Drupal. And I will be doing videos about them on my own site about them. And maybe we can talk about them here as well. But
it's a big topic, this one, yeah.
It is. And I do think that Drupal has carved out a niche where, yes, it used to be more, smaller businesses could use it. Now I think, don't even touch Drupal unless you have a Drupal developer on your team. Just have at least one Drupal developer on your team. You need at least one that takes ownership of Drupal. I am the main like Drupal tech lead on the projects that I'm on. and we have a few other people, but they do like business as usual work. But I'm the one that's doing most of the, POCs, proof of concepts and things like that. One thing that I do think that Drupal will like that, I think Drupal can also excel at, and one thing I want to do is integrating, HTMX. I think it's HTMX, yeah, where it's a nice declarative, I believe it's like that's the correct term, where you can easily create like Ajaxy stuff by just writing your HTML, and it works well for
and React.
Yes. And also like Alpine JS as well. So kind of like doing all that type of stuff. So where Drupal, use Drupal for its content modeling, which is huge. Okay. Use Drupal for its content modeling because
It's interesting to hear actually, because like I've said to you, one of the ideas we've talked about is getting you to introduce me to WordPress because I'm a Drupal guy, right?
Yeah.
And that's when you have conversations like this, and that's why I like the conversation a bit, because I know Drupal very well. I've learned a lot of Drupal. I only know Drupal. Like I don't know if there are other systems that can do what Drupal does, and I don't know what Drupal can do better than other systems because I don't know the other systems.
Yeah.
And this is a fascinating topic when you talk about Drupal as a content management system. One of the things I found fun learning about Drupal when I first learned it was the concept, and I haven't heard it for a long time, but it still applies, is Drupal is both a content management system and a framework for building content management systems, right? And I think it's changing a little bit, that it's become less of the framework and more of a content hub thing, right? Because its ability to manage content, like it's sort of used to look at it as Drupal, you use Drupal to build websites, but Drupal has carved out a bit of a niche where now and though you still can use it to build websites, and I think Gov CMS is a big testament to that. It is a very powerful content management system. Forget the theming layer, forget the building the website when it comes to managing content, organizing your content. It reminds me of when early IT days and being in high school, working with like Microsoft Access, where you'd build a bunch of tables in a database and then put forms on it and have reports and displays.
Yes.
And I was using Drupal for a long time before one day I just went, this is exactly the same model as that. And that, right.
Absolutely.
And that's a relational management database. And you look at Drupal, you go, wow, it's a extremely powerful database management designed for content. And I think that's a fascinating way of looking at Drupal. So,
one of my first Drupal sites, it was probably the first actual useful Drupal site. I was working for a online recruitment company. I wasn't doing Drupal development. I was printing out the documentation and reading it on the train about how to use Drupal. But one thing I noticed that our team of support, like I was part of like a team of 3 who offered support for this product. So I would answer, I'd be like, hello, Ivan, such and such from such and such. How can I help you? And they will be like, oh, I'm trying to post a job onto Seek or something, and this and that's not working. For people who don't know, Seek is like a job board site. I built a Drupal 6 site, which was essentially a contact management system, because I needed a way for us to have a single source of just contacts that we need to call up for all of these recruitment companies. So all I did was I installed, because I was on a Windows, installed WAMP, ran it locally, and I just created a bunch of views, a bunch of backend screens, and I just made it all public because it was literally just on like a local area network. I gave them the URL and I said, here, this is a list of contacts. And essentially it's like FileMaker, FileMaker Pro, or it is, yeah. And recently I've been trying to up my social media skills and this and that. And I've been trying to look for a tool where when I write content, okay, I want to know where it's been at. So if I've written a piece, 300, yeah. If I've produced a short form video plus images plus a bit of text, I can actually post it to my personal Instagram, to Webwash's Instagram, to my personal LinkedIn and this and this and that, but I want to be able to repurpose it. And I've been looking for a tool to essentially do that. And a few times I've been thinking, why don't I just use Drupal for it? Why don't I just have like a Drupal, like literally a Drupal site that's just access for me, that I control the data, and I can create epic views that tell me exactly, okay, this piece of content has been uploaded at this particular time a month ago. You can actually repurpose it and upload it. And then I can do some crazy stuff, like I can get ChatGPT to actually rewrite the text so it doesn't look like it's copied.
There's a module for that.
There is, but there's
Yeah,
a whole bunch of stuff. And one thing I've been thinking about is actually taking people through the process of using Drupal to build a CRM, using Drupal to build a project management tool, because incorporate that with Tailwind or some type of decent front end, I believe you can build a pretty powerful system.
It's a big reason why I want to expand beyond Drupal so I can understand Drupal better. Because a lot of those solutions, I'm like, I just use Drupal. Nearly every solution I've ever got, I'm like, I'll just use Drupal. And there is that idea of when you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Oh yeah.
But and like I said, because I'm a Drupal specialist, it is every problem I've got, I'm like, I can use Drupal for that. Like it's anything that's like a database managing content. Like you want to build a budget app, you can do that in Drupal. Because you can create entities to store transactions, and you go and put them in there, and then you can go and create views to display them all, and you can create your content type that, and it just displays a form and it's got all the fields there. It's like an access stuff. Like
it is.
And that's sort of this is funny talking to this point of when I'm passionate about this conversation. I'm not passionate about Drupal's future. I'm passionate about talking about it. Because it's really fascinating where Drupal fits and what Drupal does. And I know myself, you speak to a lot of people, you go, oh, I'm a Drupal developer, go watch Drupal, then you're like, builds websites.
Yeah.
It's but here we are talking about some very exciting stuff about, its ability to manage content.
Yeah.
Is its superpower, right?
Exactly.
And that's why in that thing it says moving headless, because that it speaks to that, because now you're not building websites out of it. It's a content management system, and it's sort of in that sense. And the name content management systems are changing their definition a bit. You got what's a new CDBMS or something, but that seems to be my take on Drupal's power, is its ability to manage content. That idea that when you install it, you've got that admin interface. You can go and you can create content types. You can start putting nodes in there. It's got user management built into it. There are modules, and then you can just build a whole new front end on it. Boom, 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 boom. Right?
Absolutely.
So, Drupal's future is fascinating in that sense, because going back, I remember years, and we're going around 2012 or something. I didn't build it, but the company I was working for had a project where it was a radio station was using it for their ad campaigns. Like when they did for the competitions, they advertised a competition on the radio. There was a Drupal instance with web forms, and they had one of their admins could just go and create a web form, and then Drupal would publish that web form, and they could just embed that as an iframe into their other website. And we're going back a long time ago, where that was, it's kind of poor man's Drupal headless in that sense, right? It was just exposing the web form and sticking that as an iframe in another website. And that was Drupal's power. Drupal was a perfect tool for doing, I want to create arbitrary forms for competitions. Yeah. Surveys would be the same, right? You got tools for doing that with like Google, but then we're talking about it's Google's not open source, right? That's another big, wonderful thing. And it's not on the list because I didn't put it on the list, that Drupal being open source, but it's kind of take it for granted a bit.
Well, that's it. Yep, absolutely. All right, well, let's move on, because we're probably running out of time. We're 0.8. So I think, you can introduce this one in.
Oh, encouragement of personal projects. Valuing employers who allow time for personal projects which provide opportunities for deep learning and exploration. I really do value this to the extent, particularly at the moment, it's on my mind because I've had some time to go and work on my own personal projects. and learn things, right? It's just that opportunity. And I find I'm passionate about it because you end up doing it anyway. It's an inherent part of Drupal is that you're building a project for a client, and you download a module and the module's got a bug, or you need an additional feature, right, to meet the requirements. And then you're writing code and you're learning that module, and it's sort of, there is that, you're learning it anyway, but then you're only learning that particular bug, and then that bug's done and it's gone and you moved on. And I think there's value in having time to learn that and put the bug, because I do find that when you're in a project, it's kind of, okay, it works, great, next, move on, right? And you don't have time to come back and massage that and what's the word? Lead it to, champion that thing to get done further. And it's not something I've particularly been exposed to, is being given that time to go and just learn Drupal. It's always solving the next problem, and that's, I was going to speak to it earlier because I know I've been given the advice by some amazing people in Drupal that one of the best things you can do is contribute to core. And it's kind of like, great, but like that's, I finish work in the afternoon, I'm absolutely exhausted. I go, I'm going to contribute to core. I go and you boot up your land, and it's like an hour later, you're just like, oh, I've got Drupal set up in a Lando environment and I'm buggered. And then 2 weeks later, you find you got another hour and it doesn't, you got to solve that problem again. And you're like, well, I don't have time, right? It's kind of in that sense. It's like in the little bits of time I've do got, they're sporadic and they're in bits, and I can't get any momentum and I can't find my feet. And so I'm a bit passionate about, especially in Drupal agencies, give your staff time to do things like contribute to core, right? Because that's, I don't have the time nor the inclination to do it outside work, and their learning value is immense. That's when you're talking before about what services are available. And I know, and we'll get to this point, when you go into the Slack, you often ask a question and there's certain people that just go, here, it's this. And they'll tell you it's because they contribute to core, that they know the answers to these things, right?
Absolutely.
I think that's my point on that one. I think I've often had to fight for, it's kind of, when we have some downtime, we'll give you some time to, it's like, and in 10 years,
it never happens.
Downtime.
I think I've only ever worked at one place where I've been able to contribute, not to core, but to modules that were pushed out. But then as soon as I left, they weren't maintained anymore. So it's always good to see certain agencies that allow their developers to contribute, and to contribute a lot. But that really comes down to just they have that culture internally. And if you can do it, that is great. I know me personally, I'm not good at contributing to, say, Drupal core, purely because I felt when I did it a few times, there's a lot of politics involved. And I'd be more than happy to help out if somebody needs help with say a module, because then at least you know the progress. For me, I like to see progress. And this comes back. And this comes back to what we were talking about before. There's different ways of contributing. And I think, and with me, the way I contribute is just by promoting Drupal. I do think everyone should promote Drupal. Drupal needs to be promoted. I don't want to be the only one with videos out there. I want Drupal to be promoted, talked about, because that's how people discover things. And so, if you can, if your company can pay for you to contribute, that's great. Do it. I do know a lot of people who actually put in a lot of time, and they have actually committed a lot of their personal time to it as well. And hats off to them.
Right? There's times where I've had, hey, I'm on holidays for 2 weeks, I'm going to do some Drupal work. Right? And you build momentum, and that's, I know, even on certain modules, and they're going, oh, this is great, you've done such great work, it's good to have you on the team. Look forward to good things, and oh no, this is not going to last very long, Right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm at work in a week, right? And I've seen on issues. I literally saw one recently where you got someone's reported a bug, been halfway through writing a patch and fixing it, and then there's a comment going, "Oh no, we don't have that requirement at work anymore. I don't have time for this." Right? That's right. Then it just, and I am trying to solve the same problem, and you're like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that guy's gone and doesn't care anymore, right? Because it was a year ago he had that problem, probably forgotten, so.
Well,
It's
that's
an interesting point, right? That's and you spoke to that point. You go, there are some companies that have a culture around that, and it's also everybody in Drupal knows who they are.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
We don't need to mention them. Yeah.
Yeah. Just go to Drupal.org and look at the sponsors on the bottom of the homepage. Yeah, it's pretty easy. It's pretty easy to know who that is. But that's good. Hey,
shout out to you.
Yeah, shout out. And sometimes I thought, maybe, it would be good to work for them, try and get a job, because you would learn a lot about Drupal. But then at the same time, you're like, well, is it too much Drupal? Can you have too much of a good thing? I don't know.
Well, that's my point. I feel typecast myself to a bit. I kind of, I'm a Drupal guy, right? And it's almost to it's my identity. People go, "What do you do?" And I'm not a web developer. I'm a Drupal developer, right? That's it's an interesting thing that, especially when you're like out with people who aren't even know. Half people in IT don't know what Drupal is, let alone you're trying to explain, what do you do for work? You go, I build Drupal sites. No, what's that? Clicky clack clack.
What is that? I don't know.
Does anybody have an elevator pitch for what Drupal is?
What is Drupal? Well, answer me this: is it, as you said earlier, is it a framework or a product? That's a question that's been asked many times.
Yeah.
It's kind of like if you merge framework and product as one word, it's kind of like that.
It's a framework.
It's a prome from, or I'm terrible at merging words, man. I'm terrible at that stuff. But yeah, that's what it is. And I think
a frame duct. That's what you
I just say, it is a content management. I like to call it a content management framework. It's a framework for creating out your content model. And in this day and age, you can use it, again, coming back to like what we were talking about earlier, use it to store your data, because your data is the most important thing. Because if you use a SaaS product, which a lot of websites now rely on, all of these fun little SaaS products where it's essentially a fancy database, either MariaDB, MySQL, Postgres, and then it gives you a nice little UI to manage it all.
Is what I keep hearing about.
Yeah, but because it's SaaS, one thing is for sure: they will double their prices. They will always double their prices. Imagine having full control over your data, and that's one thing you just need to be aware of. That, and also you can kind of mitigate your risk of using Drupal in a way where have your content indexed in a third-party service. Have Drupal store it, use Search API, and have it indexed in a third-party service, and then use AWS API pointing to it, and you're done.
Why don't you just dump it all in MongoDB?
Yeah, you can, but you don't have the UI and the and the back end. Exactly. It's a content management framework. But you can do that. Use Search API and index it in MongoDB, and you're done. Yeah, you can. And I think that's where Drupal is heading. That's where I would be if I started a new site from scratch, which I realize I have not for like 8 years. I have not built a Drupal site from scratch for a very long time.
I never have.
Yeah, that's, if I could actually architect it, that's what I would architect. Headless, if I've got the team for it. Front end, if I've got a front end team.
I think I've done it once. I'm just thinking of an example where I got the chance to build a Drupal website from scratch, and I loved it. But
I used to do it, man. I used to do it.
Apart from my own,
All right. Well, let's jump on. We're going to have 2 more points to get through, point 9 and point
They're the
10.
two best ones too.
All right. Well, let me finish. Well, let me do point 9 and you can take it home on point 10. Okay. So promoting Drupal Slack. So this is the Australia New Zealand channel, supporting this Slack channel as a hub for learning, community collaboration, despite not always being consistently active. I think it's pretty consistently active, don't you think?
Oh, that's speaking to me.
Oh, that's big. Oh, you not being consistently
Yeah.
active. Well, the thing is,
I'd love to promote it, but I'll be absent for like months at a time.
I've always been a bit of a lurker. Always, like
Yeah.
I very rarely, other than pushing out my own content. For me, I can't be active. I can't have Slack opened up and work at the same time. Essentially, I don't know how people do it. I don't know how certain individuals in that channel are so helpful, but yet they are probably 10x more productive than you are. Like my brain doesn't work like that. So
I think they're like Clark Kent, to be honest. Like
I don't know.
Some people in that channel, and hence why it's such a good thing to promote, though.
It is absolutely. It's always there. I've always got it opened up, even though I may be off, like not active, but I'm always there. The only annoying thing is that, and we've probably brought this up before, is that the fact that it's using Slack. I believe that there's been talk many times about moving off Slack because I think we are.
I 100% agree with that, but then that's not this point. But
exactly.
No, I absolutely.
That's the only thing I will avoid, because it's also great for meetups whenever we're at Drupal South. That's the thing I like. For me personally, I don't have Slack on my phone, and I do that because I don't want it on my phone. And again, this is probably a conversation about async. Well, no, what is it? This type of communication in this day and age, but I don't really like chat stuff too much because it requires that instant reply. But I do install Slack when I go to Drupal South, so I can just chat, because often people are like, oh yeah, we're at the pub, such and such, or yeah. So absolutely.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. I'm a talky person. Especially when you're working at home too. It's a place to be able to connect and bounce ideas and stuff. And that's I know I need to consciously, like if a thread starts, I need to pull myself back and I'll make the decision. Don't comment anymore. Because I'll just keep commenting.
Okay.
And I've got it on my phone, so that is on me. If anyone ever direct messaged me or anything, my phone will go beep, and it doesn't. It's not. But I like being connected to the community like that. Sometimes, every once in a while, someone does just go bim, oh, right, and then I'm back in the Slack for a few days.
I'm always like,
it's the same thing. Sometimes you're working and you just forget to open it, or you're busy on a project and they got their own Slack channel, right? And your time in there. But it's less the Slack channel itself, but that community being, because it used to be IRC, and I would have said the same thing in that channel as well. There are people. This is my biggest advice for anybody in Drupal is just get onto the Slack channels, even internationally. This is specifically the Australia NZ one because that's where I hang out. But the connections and the amazing people in there who are full of incredible information. And now even in my journey, when I first started chatting Slack, I'd ask a question and certain people would respond, and I'm like, I don't know what they're talking about. But I saw that. That's a place where I noticed that I could ask questions and they'd respond. And I do know what you're talking about, right? That's see that progression happen. Whether their communication skills got better, or if my ability to understand got better, I don't know. But it's just such a good. We talked about the local meetups and stuff before. And it's the same because it's the extra glue on that same connection. It's a place where you can share.
So now I believe we are up to our final point. So you can finish off the final point, which is point 10.
Point 10. It's the lovely one, building friendships, which leads us to being here in the first place. I think it's one of I think it's so passé when you hear people say, because it's the Drupal catchphrase, come for the code, stay for the community. I used to think that was such a ridiculous thing. but it's exactly what happens, and it's entirely true. It's such a big thing about Drupal. I mean, the first time I went to Drupal South at Wellington, I was almost like, what am I like at an Amway conference or something? Because people were so passionate and excited about it. That was my first introduction. But then over time, I've made friends like your one. People I literally consider mates, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You kind of notice that when they move from Slack and Drupal.org to Facebook, for example, right?
They have moved up.
Yeah. But there are people that I straight up consider friends now, and I've met just literally through Drupal. And interesting word to say passionate about, something I really value from Drupal. There are some really great people, a lot of diverse people, but that's also, there's nothing else in my career life. There's no other tool that I can pinpoint at all where I've made friends through that. Not that other tools can't produce that, and it's probably because I'm a Drupal specialist, but there's a few, and I've been around for a lot of years now. But well, let's put it in this way. Like, I've worked at a few different places, and you make mates with colleagues and co-workers, but then you change jobs and you kind of never speak to them again. When it comes to Drupal, there are people I am friends with. If I stopped doing Drupal, I'd still be friends with them, right?
Yeah.
You know, I have friends that I met in the Drupal community who don't do Drupal anymore, and they're my friends, right? So that's it's really, I don't know if it's anything particularly about Drupal or not. It's probably the conferences or something, but it's just something I really value, or just at least acknowledge that those connections with people are valuable, and there's more to. So when you say staying for the community, it goes really deep in that sense. Like, I have friends, which is just really, really cool. From something as broad, like it's a bloody tool that you build websites with, you know?
Well, that's it. Yeah, I know for myself that when I was living in Sydney and I'd be working in the CBD back before COVID, all that stuff, I would often work with people that are new through the Drupal community, and we'd often bump in, and it's like, you're working on this project, and straight away, instantly, we already had that rapport. We knew each other. Straight away, I knew, I'm working with this person. That's either a good thing or a bad thing, depending on the person, of course. You know, but also when I've already been established in a team, I might get the manager come up to me and say, have you worked with this person in the past? And I see their resume come across, and then, I would either say, yes, I've worked with them, or no, I haven't worked with them. But Drupal being...
I've seen some of their work. Yeah. You know, like that happens too. I know who they are.
Exactly. Like, I'm the same, like seeing their commits in Gits. It's like, this person worked on this site, especially when you work on a website that's gone through a few agencies. You know exactly who's worked on it. But I know every single time I go to like Drupal South, the first thing I do, I come always the day before, always put into Slack or on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, and say, I'm available. I'm free. I'm walking around. And I always meet up with people beforehand. So for me, it's always important to just get it to, like the friendships that I've made. They will be lifelong friendships, and that's all purely from Drupal. And I do know that a few times when I've gone to Drupal cons and camps in Europe as well, I have met the same people, and we kind of just start, talking about, we just kind of continue our conversation from like the first time I met them 3 years beforehand. And, they're everyone seems to remember me. I have a terrible memory about remembering people unless I've really spent a lot of time with them. Yeah, exactly. But if I've just glanced, if it was just a simple, hi, how you doing at a pub, unfortunately, I forget a lot of people. But if it's like a lengthy conversation, then I will remember them, of course.
Well, it's funny how a lot of these things tie together. These points in that sense, because this brings you right back to Slack. local meetups, Drupal South, those things, because that's speaking to Drupal South, I've said at times, Drupal South is not just my favorite Drupal event of the year, it's my favorite event of the year. I have had that experience on a few years where it's like Drupal South's come, but it's unfortunately I'm not going this year. But because of that, because of this, it's almost like it's a holiday. You get to go to meet all your mates you haven't seen for ages. Like where was it, in Brisbane? The last one?
No, it was Wellington. Were you last year?
I didn't go to the last one either. The one in Brisbane, though, I just remember getting there and just seeing all these faces I hadn't seen for a year, and that feeling's quite, it's going and meet everybody. That's such a so I mean, it seems like such a strange thing to say, to stay for the community, but there's pockets of community too, right? It's almost not the community. It's you stay for the community you're connected to. I don't think Drupal's, and maybe it's an NZ thing, because we tend to be a bit isolated down here as well. I've heard people speak to that about, they call some of the Australian devs the Australian angels, because the rest of the world goes to sleep and wake up in the morning and a bunch of issues are fixed.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. We are very far away from the rest of the world.
Yeah, but by time and space.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think for me, Brisbane was the first conference I went to, like a big conference since, first one since COVID. And I went to Wellington, and I came back with COVID from Wellington, which was annoying. But I didn't get it from Brisbane, which was weird. I thought I'll for sure get it anyway. So hopefully I won't get it in Sydney, COVID. But
this is such a funny one. It just seems so ick. Like, oh, Drupal's so great because you make friends, but you do.
You do, absolutely.
You absolutely do.
Absolutely.
It's a good one to end on, I think.
Yeah, well, let's just finish it up on that. So that is our top, well, Bevan actually wrote these, so thank you for that. And we will probably add these below in the show notes, wherever this is posted. So do check them out. And if you can comment, chuck in your opinions and
tell us what you think of our very first podcast that we just.
Well, A, it's going to be too long, or B, we're talking over each other. But I don't know. Let's just see what this comes out and how it comes edited. Yeah.
I know.
All right. Well, let's finish it off there. Thank you very much.
How long was it? Curiosity.
Well, right now it's 1 hour and 49 minutes, but we did waffle on and talk before we officially started. So it's going to be less than that. Anyway, so let's finish it off with that. Thanks for joining us, and join us for episode 2. See you later.
Yeah. Thanks.